There is a family in New England that has eaten Sunday lunch at the same table every week for 4 generations. Not because anyone made a rule, not because there's a calendar reminder, because it has simply always been done that way. And to stop would feel like a small, quiet betrayal of everyone who came before. There is a family in the English countryside where every male heir, going back 130 years, has been given the same middle name. Nobody discusses it. Nobody explains it. It just happens, and everyone understands why. Old money families don't just have money. They have traditions. And unlike the money, which can be measured, transferred, and in theory replicated, the traditions are completely invisible to anyone raised outside them. They are passed on not through documents, but through behavior, through assumption, through the unspoken understanding that this is simply how things are done. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what those traditions are, 9 of them, and I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at a so-called wealthy family the same way again. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. What I'm covering today is not the flashy, performative wealth you see on social media, not the new money world of $500 million yachts and rented Lamborghinis. I'm talking about families whose wealth is measured in centuries, not in Forbes rankings. These are families like the Cecils, the DuPonts, the Vanderbilts in their quieter modern incarnations, and their European equivalents, the aristocratic houses whose names appear on the same estate deeds for 300 and 400 years. What binds them, across every culture and every generation, is not just inherited money, it is inherited behavior, a complete, detailed, invisible code for how life is conducted. These are not traditions most of them would ever discuss openly with an outsider. And that, right there, is the first tradition we need to talk about. Number 1, the silence about money. The first and most fundamental tradition of old money culture is one you will never observe directly, because its very nature is invisibility. They never, under any circumstances, discuss money in social settings. Not their own money, not anyone else's. Not prices, not salaries, not what anything cost, not how much anything is worth. To ask, "What did you pay for this?" in an old money home is the equivalent of standing up in a restaurant and making a scene. It is, in their world, the single most revealing mark of someone who did not grow up around wealth. New money announces itself. Old money conceals itself, deliberately, consistently, and from a very young age. Children in these families are taught, often without being explicitly taught, simply by osmosis, that discussing money is vulgar. The word rich is never used. Comfortable or fortunate might be, at a stretch, in the right context. But even those words are used sparingly, and always about others, never about oneself. This creates something fascinating. Old money families can be surrounded by extraordinary wealth, art worth millions, estates worth tens of millions, and navigate their entire social lives without the subject ever arising directly. They discuss ideas, land, family, history, sport, never figures, never valuations. The result is a social fluency that new money consistently struggles to replicate, because new money is frequently still defining its identity through financial achievement, still using the number as the proof of the person. Old money families ceased needing that proof several generations ago. Number 2, the naming tradition. Old money families name their children with extraordinary deliberateness, and within strict, unwritten rules that most outsiders find baffling. The practice of carrying family names across generations is not simply sentiment, It is active, intentional identity reinforcement. A family name used as a first name or a middle name is a statement of belonging. It says, you are not just a person. You are a continuation. You carry in your name the weight and the privilege of everyone who came before you. It is extremely common in old money families to find the same first name appearing every alternate generation, a grandfather's name given to a grandson, creating a living continuity that skips over the middle generation, as if to stitch the lineage directly together. Names like George, Henry, Charles, James, Elizabeth, Caroline, names with enough historical weight to carry the lineage, appear again and again. Nicknames in these families are a separate phenomenon entirely. Because given names are often repeated, elaborate, or formal, families develop rich private nickname cultures. Names that exist only within the family and the closest social circle that an outsider would never know or use. The private nickname is a marker of true intimacy. To know someone's family nickname is to be genuinely inside the circle. The tradition also extends to godparenthood. Old money families select godparents with the same deliberateness that other families might reserve for legal matters. A godparent is not merely a ceremonial role. It is a relationship with real social obligations and real expectations of mentorship, advancement, and inclusion. A well-chosen set of godparents is, in the old money world, a child's second social passport. Number 3, the country house weekend. The country house weekend is one of the oldest and most defining social traditions in the old money world, and it is one that has survived, largely intact, from the Victorian era to the present day. The structure is simple. From Friday evening to Sunday afternoon, a group of carefully selected guests arrives at the family's country property. What unfolds is not a party, not an event. It is an extended, intimate performance of who everyone is and where everyone stands, conducted entirely through informal social interaction over approximately 48 hours. Who is invited matters enormously and is managed with the care and deliberateness that other people reserve for business strategy. The guest list is never random. It serves a purpose, introductions to be made, relationships to be deepened, a particular social constellation to be assembled. Old money families have been managing their social networks through these weekends for 150 years, and they are extraordinarily skilled at it. The activities are traditional to the point of ritual. Shooting in its season, riding, long walks, formal dinners on Saturday evening. Dressing for dinner is still expected, followed by conversation that goes on well past midnight. Sunday morning church in some families as automatic as breakfast. What makes the country house weekend so effective as a tradition is what it reveals over time. 48 hours of shared living, meals, walks, evenings by the fire, strips away performance and exposes character. Old money families use these weekends to evaluate people, potential spouses, business partners, new members of the social circle. By Sunday afternoon, they know everything they need to know. Number 4, the handwritten letter. In a world where communication has collapsed into instant messages and overnight delivery, old money families continue, without irony, without affectation, to write letters by hand. Not for every communication, but for the communications that matter. Thank you notes after staying as a guest. Condolences. Congratulations on a marriage, a birth, a significant achievement. Letters of introduction. Letters to mark the passing of a season or a stage of life. The handwritten letter in old money culture is not nostalgia. It is a signal. It says, I gave you real time. I sat down, I found the right stationery, I chose my words, I wrote them physically on paper, and I sent them to you through the post. In a world of 2-second replies, that investment is the most legible form of respect available. Stationery itself carries meaning. Old money families have house stationery, heavy cream stock, often engraved with an address or a family crest, that has been ordered from the same supplier, in some cases, for decades. To receive a handwritten note on that stationery is to receive a piece of the family's identity, not just a message. Children in old money households are taught to write thank you letters from the time they can hold a pen. A gift received without a written acknowledgement, not a text, not an email, a physical letter, is a mark against the family. It is a failure of manners that, in certain circles, genuinely affects reputation. The discipline of the thank you letter is the gateway through which every other tradition of acknowledgement and reciprocity flows. Number 5, the sport tradition. Old money families do not simply play sport, they inherit sport. The specific sports associated with generational wealth, polo, shooting, sailing, fox hunting, fly fishing, fencing, are not chosen for their fitness benefits or their entertainment value. They are practiced because they have been practiced by every preceding generation of the family, and because their practice creates a complete social world. Its own clubs, its own events calendar, its own codes of conduct, its own language. To be a serious polo player in the right circles is to have automatic entry to a social network that no amount of money can simply purchase. The same is true of competitive sailing, of game shooting, of the old field sports. These activities function as social credentials, a parallel system of belonging that runs alongside, and sometimes above, the formal structures of school and profession. The tradition of the sport is passed down with all the deliberateness of a name. Children are introduced to the family sport young, often before they can fully understand it, because the point is not competence, not initially. The point is belonging. To grow up in the presence of the sport, to absorb its rhythms and rituals and vocabulary, is to be formed by it in a way that cannot be replicated by taking it up at 30. This is one of the subtler but more revealing markers of old money versus new. New money can buy the equipment, the lessons, the club membership. It cannot buy the ease, the unconscious fluency, the way an old money person moves in the context of their inherited sport, with complete relaxation, total familiarity. That is the product of a childhood spent doing exactly this, and no amount of money spent in adulthood can produce it. Number 6, the education pipeline. Old money families do not simply send their children to good schools. They send them to specific schools. The same schools, in many cases, that their fathers and grandfathers attended, and they manage that educational pipeline with the same multi-generational precision they apply to everything else. In England, the great public schools, Eton, Harrow, Winchester, Rugby, have served as the organizational backbone of upper-class social life for centuries. An old money family with a son at Eton is not simply accessing an education. They are accessing a social web, the alumni network, the friendships formed under pressure over 5 years of shared living, the particular culture of confidence and authority that those schools are specifically designed to instill. In America, the equivalent pipeline runs through the old New England prep schools, Andover, Exeter, Groton, St. Paul's, and then directly to the Ivy League, with Harvard and Yale carrying the most weight. Not because they are necessarily the best academic institutions in every discipline, but because the network they provide, the lifelong social and professional web, is, for certain families, the real product being purchased. The tradition extends to what happens after formal education. The Grand Tour, historically a years-long journey through Europe for cultural formation, has a modern equivalent in the gap year or the early 20s period of structured experience. Internships at respected institutions, time working on the estate, a period living abroad. The purpose, as it has always been, is the formation of a complete person, not merely a credentialed one. Number 7, the inheritance conversation. One of the most distinctive and most consequential traditions of old money families is one that never appears in any social setting: the inheritance conversation. At a specific age, usually the late teens or early 20s, children in old money families are brought into a formal conversation about the family's financial structure. They learn, often for the first time in any detail, what exists: the trusts, the properties, the investments, the obligations, the debts that sometimes accompany heritage, the terms under which assets can be accessed, and the conditions attached to them. This conversation is one of the most significant rites of passage in old money life, precisely because it marks the transition from being the recipient of the family's legacy to being, actively, one of its custodians. The message is explicit: this does not belong to you. You hold it on behalf of your children and your grandchildren. Your job is not to spend it. Your job is to preserve it, maintain it, and pass it on in better condition than you received it. The psychological effect of this framing, received young and reinforced throughout life, produces a fundamentally different relationship to wealth than anything that can be acquired in adulthood. Old money families do not think of their wealth as a reward or an achievement. They think of it as a responsibility, a burden occasionally, a gift certainly, but never simply theirs to do with as they please. This is, perhaps more than anything else, the single greatest cultural distinction between old and new money. New money is won. Old money is held in trust. Number 8, the vetting tradition. Old money families are extraordinarily careful about who enters the family circle, and they have developed over generations a sophisticated and entirely unofficial system for evaluating new people. When a family member introduces a new partner, the vetting process begins immediately and runs on 2 parallel tracks. The first is social. Is this person fluent in the culture? Do they know how to behave at a formal dinner, how to carry themselves in the sport tradition, how to write the thank you letter, how to hold a conversation without discussing money or performing status? Fluency, ease, is the quality being assessed. The second track is genealogical. Who are their people? Not in the snobbish, exclusionary sense that the tradition sometimes carried in previous generations, though that existed and cannot be denied, but in the more practical sense of what is this person's formation? What values, what traditions, what relationship to obligation and restraint do they bring with them? New money can pass the first test with enough education and awareness. The second test is harder to manufacture, which is why, even today, old money families tend, not exclusively, not without exception, to cluster together, not from prejudice alone, but from the recognition that a shared formation makes everything easier. The country house weekend, the sport, the naming conventions, the inheritance conversation, all of these are easier to navigate together when both people already understand the code. The thread through all of it. When you step back and look at all 9 of these traditions, the silence about money, the naming, the country house weekend, the handwritten letter, the inherited sport, the education pipeline, the inheritance conversation, the vetting of new members, one thread runs through every single one of them. These traditions are not about wealth. They are about continuity, about the belief, genuinely held, deeply embedded, that the individual is less important than the lineage, that the purpose of any single life, however remarkable, is to receive what was given by those who came before and pass it on, intact, preferably enriched, to those who come after. In a culture that prizes the individual above almost everything, that framing is genuinely radical. And it is, I think, the real secret that all these visible traditions are guarding. If this opened a door for you, the next video is the one on old money homes, what they look like, what they refuse to do, and why the most expensive interiors in the world can never quite replicate the feeling of walking into a house that has been lived in by the same family for 150 years. I'll see you there.